Hi everyone! Today's video is the second in our multi-part video series on how to manage and overcome depression. And in the first video, we talked about a model for understanding how depression happens and how depression gets you to think and behave in ways that fuel and perpetuate the depression itself. It's a negative spiral in which depression gets you to behave in more depression-promoting ways and think depression-promoting thoughts. But the key point from that discussion is that it gives us a pathway to start the recovery process in depression. That if you make positive changes in your behavior and thinking, it can have a positive effect in how you feel. And that's how we make the necessary changes to overcome depression. And that's why we start with changing behavior. Because of these three aspects of human behavior, human experience: thoughts, emotions, and behavior. Behavior is the one that you have the most control over. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about one of the traps that depression will set for you to try to make it harder, if not impossible, to change your behavior. But before I get into that, just a couple of disclaimers to go over. I'm a registered psychologist in the province of British Columbia, Canada, and this video is for informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute or replacement for advice from your doctor or mental health professional. So with those things out of the way, let's start talking about the nasty trap that depression sets for you. Now, one of the things that you might be aware of is that conditions like depression and anxiety tend to sap motivation and energy. Have you ever noticed that when you're feeling particularly down, you stop doing the things that might help you feel better? Things like responding to text messages from friends, going for a walk, exercising, eating a healthy diet, hobbies like playing sports or crafting at home. You probably have a sense that if you did some of these activities, you'd probably feel better. But when we're feeling really down and depressed, we don't have a whole lot of motivation or drive to do these things, even though we know that they might make us feel better. And why is this? Why is it that when we're feeling depressed, at a time when we should be focusing on things that make us feel better, we don't do those things that might actually make us feel better? Well, there are a couple of reasons for this. The first is that you might not be all that convinced that doing any of these activities will actually make you feel any better. So what if I go for a walk? I'm still going to feel awful afterwards. What's the point? You may also find that you don't want to engage in these types of beneficial activities because you don't have any motivation or drive to do any of these things. And the thing is, we're used to doing things because we want to do those activities, because we feel like doing those activities. There's a drive, there's an interest, there's a desire to go for a walk, to go to the gym, to get together with friends. And with depression, when you don't have the motivation or drive or desire, it can be tempting to want to wait for that motivation to return before you get started, before you do any of these activities. In other words, I'll wait until I feel motivated to do something, and when that motivation kicks in, then I'll do it. But this is one of the traps that depression sets for you, because what happens if your motivation doesn't come back on its own? What happens if I'm just waiting and waiting and waiting to feel motivated or driven to do something, but that drive is never there? Well, what ends up happening is that I don't do anything. And what does that do to how I feel? Well, that just makes me feel even worse. It makes my depression even worse because I'm not doing any of those activities that might make me feel better, and I end up in those negative spirals that I'm constantly talking about. So rather than waiting for the motivation to return, the key first step is to engage in behavior even though you don't feel like doing it. And this is a really important point. We often hold the faulty belief that motivation precedes action. In other words, I'm motivated to do something, and it's because of that motivation that I engage in the activity. But it's actually the opposite. Behavior is what fuels motivation. The example I like to give is when you first start going to the gym. You might find that you're not particularly motivated to be at the gym. It's tiring, you don't feel very strong, you're really sweaty, your muscles are aching. It feels really awkward. You don't have a lot of motivation to be there. But if you persist, just keep going to the gym even though you don't feel like doing it, what ends up happening is that you start to feel a little bit stronger. You start to see some progress. Your clothes start to fit differently. You start to have more energy. So what ends up happening is now you start to feel more driven and more motivated to go to the gym, because by going to the gym in the first place, you've built that sense of motivation and enjoyment and reward that comes from going to the gym. The analogy that I use to explain this is that it's like one of those old-fashioned water pumps where you have to lift and push down the lever to pump water out of the well. Now, when you first put in one of those water pumps, you don't instantly get water when you pump the lever. The water is at the bottom of the well, and there's this long pipe that goes down into the well that's used to bring the water up. So you pump the handle of the water pump and you're not getting any water because it takes a while for the water to go up from the bottom of the well all the way into the pipe until it comes out of the spout. So you're doing all of this work. You're pumping the handle of this water pump, but you're not getting any water. But the reason you're doing it is to prime the pump so that eventually the water will come out and you don't have to keep doing all of that pumping without getting water. It's the same with building motivation. You may have to do a lot of pumping without getting any water, but eventually the water will come. Eventually the motivation will return to these activities and you'll feel more drive and interest in doing them. And so the next pitfall that depression will set for you in this process is that you may not know what it is exactly that you need to do to feel better. You may have a bunch of problems in your life and you may not know what the solutions are to those problems and what you need to do to address those problems in order to feel better. You may not like your job. You may be having problems in relationships. You may not know what you should be studying at university. So what ends up happening is that a person gets stuck because they're paralyzed with indecision, not sure which of these big life changes they need to make. And that's exactly where depression would want you to focus, on those bigger life decisions that are more complex and more difficult to know exactly what it is that you want. So you may not know whether or not you should be changing your job, but there are probably some things that you do know you want. For example, you may know that you want to get into better shape. You may know that you want to see your best friend more often. You may know that you want to get out of bed before noon. So you do know some things that could help, and that's where to start. The other bigger issues, those uncertain issues, those steps might become clearer once you get started on some of these other more clearly identifiable starting points. And now the biggest pitfall that depression will set for you is one that might surprise you. The biggest pitfall that depression will set is that it will get you to try really, really hard to get over the depression as quickly as you can. Depression will convince you that you need to set big goals and big expectations for yourself. And by setting those big goals and big expectations, that's how you're going to get out of the depression. And this is the nasty trick, the nasty lie that depression will convince you of. And I want to explain how it works. I want you to think about a graph, and on one axis of the graph is your level of energy and motivation, your amount of drive and the energy you have to do things. And the other axis of the graph is time. And I want you to think about the levels of goals and expectations that you have for yourself and how much energy those goals and expectations require. Now, most of the time when we're not experiencing depression, our level of motivation and energy matches our level of goals and expectations for ourselves. Essentially, we have the energy and motivation to do the things that we expect ourselves to be doing. And for the most part, this is entirely sustainable. However, sometimes people can set goals and expectations for themselves that aren't really sustainable. They may have perfectionistic expectations of what they should be accomplishing, what they should be in their relationships, how much they should be working to get ahead and succeed. Sometimes our baseline expectations of ourselves might be part of the problem that leads to the onset of depression in the first place. We can sometimes set goals and expectations that are impossible to achieve, and if I'm constantly unsatisfied with trying to achieve these lofty expectations or goals, how do you think I'm going to feel? Well, I'm probably going to feel pretty discouraged, discontent, and eventually depressed. Now, setting that aside, let's assume that our expectations for ourselves are reasonable and appropriate, and we live our lives with the level of energy and motivation that we need to achieve those expectations and goals. But now, imagine something happens. You experience a setback at work, maybe you lose your job, maybe your relationship isn't going very well, maybe you get sick. Think about what that does to your level of energy and motivation. These are all things that may sap energy and motivation and drive. And so now my energy and motivation declines. So my energy and motivation are now lower than what it needs to be to live up to the expectations and goals that I have in my life. And what do you think happens to my level of energy and motivation when I fail to achieve those expectations and standards that I hold myself to? Well, we know that failure saps motivation and energy. So now I'm in a situation where my energy and motivation aren't where they need to be, and so I failed to achieve those goals and expectations. And with that failure, my energy and motivation have dropped even more because I'm not living up to my expectations of myself. And this is where depression gets really, really nasty and really tricky. My level of goals and expectations are here, but my level of motivation and energy is here. And so how do I bridge that gap? Well, depression will tell me that what I need to do is to just try harder. Pick yourself up by the bootstraps, stop with the pity party, and just try harder. And so what I do is I try even harder to live up to those expectations and standards for myself. And I'm going to work really hard to try and achieve those goals and expectations. But am I going to be able to achieve those goals and expectations even if I try really, really hard? Well, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how hard I try. The fact of the matter is, I don't have the energy and motivation that's required to achieve those goals and expectations. And now I've failed again, even though I've tried really, really hard. So what happens with depression is that I'm facing these constant failures and this constant inability to achieve my goal or live up to my standards for myself. And in doing so, I just experience failure and get more and more down about myself and my situation. And this is where I'll often see people when they come in for therapy. Their motivation and energy is extremely low. They feel awful about themselves and they just see themselves as total failure, unable to live up to what they used to be able to do. Now the thing is, a lot of people hold the mistaken belief that depression is caused by a person giving up, by a person not trying. But the reality is depression isn't caused by a person giving up. Depression is caused by a person trying too hard, pushing themselves too hard to live up to their goals and expectations that they simply don't have the energy and the motivation to do. And so we're left with this situation. My motivation and energy are way down here, and my goals and expectations for myself are way up here. And so how do I fix this? Well, the counterintuitive solution to this problem is not to try harder, but to give up. To give up on those bigger goals and expectations, to surrender those expectations of yourself and drop your level of goals and expectations to actually match your level of motivation and energy. And I know this can be a bit of an odd thing to try and wrap your head around. And so I want you to think about this metaphor. Imagine I'm riding my bicycle, I'm having a lovely ride, and I approach a stop sign. I come to a complete stop on my bike. Now, what would happen if I tried to start riding again with my bike in 20th gear? What do you think would take place? I can push as hard as I want on those pedals. I can try as hard as I want. I can put in as much effort and energy doing my best to push on those pedals. The bike's not going anywhere because the gear is just way too high. So what do I have to do? Well, what I have to do to get going is to drop my bike down into first gear. Now, that doesn't mean I spend my entire bike ride in first gear, but I drop my bike into first gear just to get me going. And once I get going, then I can put my bike into second gear and then into third gear and fourth, and eventually work my way back up to cruising along in 20th gear. It's the same with overcoming depression. By giving up those goals and expectations that you have for yourself, what you're doing is you're dropping down your goals and expectations into a gear that you can handle. You're dropping your goals and expectations into first gear. And if you're setting goals and expectations that you actually have the motivation and energy to do, are you going to be able to achieve those goals? Well, yes, you probably are going to be able to succeed at those goals. And what do you think happens to motivation and energy when you succeed at something? When you actually accomplish a goal that you set for yourself? What do you think that does to your energy and motivation? Well, success builds motivation and energy. It's not going to jump your motivation and energy all the way up to your baseline the first time you succeed at something. But what it does is it interrupts this negative cycle of high expectations leading to failure, leading to high expectations, leading to more failure. You set a goal that you can achieve, it increases your energy and motivation just a little bit. And so what you do then is that you increase your goal just a little bit to match that new level of motivation and energy that you have. And if you succeed at that goal, that leads to another bump in energy and motivation, and so on and so forth. And over time, this approach of setting goals that match your level of motivation and energy will build your motivation and energy back to a point where you may have been before you began feeling depressed. And this is a much faster way of getting better than setting those really high expectations and goals that depression is telling you to set, that you continue to fail to achieve. It's like you're standing at the base of a 20-foot wall and you want to get to the top of that wall. The most direct way is to just jump and bound to the top of the wall in one jump. And if you could do that, you probably would. But no one is capable of jumping to the top of a wall like that. So you can jump all you want. You can try as hard as you want to jump to the top of that wall. You're never going to get there. The much faster way, even though it's more indirect, is to walk along the length of the wall and then go up the spiral staircase at the end of the wall that will get you to the top. That's kind of what we're talking about here with this model of changing behavior to overcome depression. And in the next video in this series, we're going to be talking about how you actually set realistic goals and expectations for yourself that match your level of motivation and energy in order to start building a series of successes with your goals, which in turn will give you more motivation and energy and help you with chipping away at depression. And if you're looking for that video, you'll be able to find it here once I've posted it. And if not, in the meantime, I encourage you to check out this video that introduces this idea of goal setting. So that's all for today's video. As always, thank you for making it all the way to the end of this video, and I will see you in the next one.